So, on with things. Verdi, 100 years ahead from the Mozart we heard, La Forza del Destino. This is the kind of tragedy I was referring to earlier on. The opening notes you'll hear in the overture are quoted later on in the opera. It's the sound of destiny. This is a knock at the door. This is bad news coming, and there's nothing you can do to get out of the way. It's the stuff that happens to everybody in life, only on a much bigger scale, and all you can do is hang on and hope you get through it. So the story has all kinds of twists and turns. I'll tell you the beginning. There's Leonora, who wants to marry Don Alvaro. They're eloping. Leonora's dad catches them in the act while they're packing up their stuff. Assumes the worst. Assumes that she might be pregnant, that she's dishonored the family. Pistols are drawn. Now, Don Alvaro is a good guy. We identify with Leonora and Don Alvaro because they're honorable people. They're just young people making mistakes, the stuff we all do. They're trying to do the right thing, but there are pistols drawn. And he would say, Don Alvaro says that he would never kill the father of his bride-to-be, but the pistol misfires, hits him anyway. Dad's down, dying. As he dies, with his final breath, he curses his daughter. His son, Leonora's brother, hears what happens. And he says he will avenge his father's death, kill Don Alvaro, and Don Alvaro's sister, who wasn't even there. That's the first scene. Giuseppe Verdi's La Forza del Destino overture. Now, I've often pointed out how I'd like to see fashion changing in music, as it does in everything. There are all kinds of great examples from the non-musical world. Bicycles is one of my favorite examples, right? If you look at style in bicycles, they get more and more stuff. First there's 3 speeds, then there's 10, then there's 18, then there's 27, and you can get different kinds of brake systems and all kinds of doodads. So bicycles get more and more complicated, and then all of a sudden, as is the fashion now in downtown Toronto, the really hip bike to have is a direct drive bike with no gears at all, just one, right? No brakes. Or cars, SUVs, bigger and bigger and bigger. Then the smart car comes along, right? So these things shift back and forth. The same was true in opera at exactly the same time as Bizet. Well, no, Bizet didn't really enjoy the success of Carmen. He didn't make it through the run. He died. Another terrible story. He died after the 25th performance, I think. Sickly man, never realized the real extent of his success. At any rate, at the same time as the opera was on, there were people that were really tired already of such real pain and dirt on stage. And they didn't want to have to go through that to enjoy an opera. It would be like the difference between CSI and Friends. Or Seinfeld. There are people that just really wanted a laugh or two. And, do we really have to go through all this, they were saying? Why don't we just enjoy a nice little time where people get to interact and touch on some emotional issues and then let us go home and not have to worry about all that? Well, that's what we're going to bring to you now. From Johann Strauss, the Waltz King, who wrote so many successful waltzes and operettas, Die Fledermaus, a story of social interaction when a married couple are tempted by others. And they might have strayed a little bit, but it's nothing that big a deal, really, and we can all go home and feel fine at the end of it. Now, most of the music we've been listening to today comes from the 19th century, the middle, late 1800s. And that was a time of not quite globalism, but it was a time when musical styles spread out around Europe, so that Wagner's influence, for example, was felt all through Europe, through Italy and through France, except for Spain. Spain had a strange kind of insular culture, musically speaking, through most of right up to the 20th century, to the point that their operatic culture was very different than what was going on in the rest of Europe. And there was a time there, especially when French composers started sort of discovering Spain, and they were all thrilled with Spanish music, and so that most of the, quote, Spanish music from the late part of the 19th century was written in France. They were really excited about Spanish culture. But the good thing that occurred with all that insular kind of quality was that this Spanish tradition got to develop in its own kind of unique way. It was not affected by the rest of Europe's musical thought. So their operatic tradition really comes from an operetta basis, dialogue as well as music. It's called the zarzuela, and it had been going on as long as opera in the rest of Europe. And because it was isolated in some ways, it had this wonderful inside joke quality to it that Spaniards got, and they had this smug notion that the rest of Europe didn't get their jokes. So we're going to let you in on one of those today. And that was that most of these zarzuelas, which were lighter stories in the folk sort of vein, always included a kitchen scene. where at some point in the proceedings, the people are settling some sort of dispute or discussing some issue around food, which is logical enough. But just to make sure, just to bring that home, it was important to use one of the kitchen implements as a musical instrument. So if you ever see a zarzuela production or music from a zarzuela, there's always something from the kitchen in the percussion section. And Laurie West, who you'll see over there, say hi, Laurie. Wave, there you go. Yeah. See, she's got her mixing bowl. Now, here, I'll just come back and get the full details here. Hold on. All right. So, Laurie, what are you going to hit this bowl with?
My chime beater.
A chime beater. Couldn't you use like a mixer or a whisk or something?
This is nice and heavy.
Okay.
Yeah. I have to admit, though, that it did sound a bit better yesterday because I dented it.
Yeah, there's a big dent. I was going to say, look, right here, see? There. Can we hear an advance audition of the mixing bowl?
Sure.
That's a nice bowl. Just one last note. I thought you should know, in this age of globalism, even though this is truly traditional Spanish operetta music from the zarzuela, this bowl was made in India. So, music from the Spanish composer Jerónimo Jiménez. This is from La Boda de Luis Alonso, featuring the Indian-manufactured mixing bowl. On to George Gershwin, who we've talked about some pretty tragic figures among the composers that wrote this music. George Gershwin was, in many ways, not one of them, and it's easy to think ill of him in some ways. He was phenomenally successful. By the time he was 32, he was on a first-name basis with basically all royalty. He knew the Prince of Wales personally. The Mountbattens were friends. They'd invite him over for dinner. Fabulously wealthy, known everywhere, huge success. The last thing he really wanted to do was write a grand opera. And so he chose a story about, well, somebody that was about as different from him as he could be. Porgy and Bess. Porgy is lame, he's handicapped, he's black, and he's poor. George Gershwin, none of those things. And, it's easy to look down on that in many ways. I was reading about George Gershwin's life, and I found something that I did not know just this morning. Gershwin was, despite all of his wealth and his privilege and his success, he was miserably lonely. And actually, throughout his 30s, when he was at his highest, his peak of success, he went through intensive psychoanalysis and therapy trying to find happiness. He was perennially lonely. Women were drawn to him in droves, but he never found love. And he died very young, late 30s, a very, very unhappy and lonely man. So he stayed up all night reading DuBose Hayward's novel Porgy, on which he based the opera. And I'm sure the idea of Porgy, this man who has so many difficulties that Gershwin has not, having this simple love, because when you hear these songs about Porgy's love for Bess or about Porgy's happiness at being just who he is, it's the one thing, the only thing that George Gershwin did not have, that kind of carefree sense of himself. He never found it. So tragic opera where you least expect it. A song from Porgy and Bess, where Porgy's telling us just how fun it is to be Porgy. Please welcome the baritone Mike Uloth.